Hi, my name is Jordan. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ, and I struggle with anger, anxiety, and control. Welcome back to the Crosstalk Cafe, everyone. Today we are looking at one of the hardest actions in the entire recovery journey, letting go of a grudge when you were completely, legitimately wronged. We're going to look at the story of Esau and Jacob. But before we get into the Word of God, Chris, I was thinking about how so many of us spend years trying to quiet our stress, but we're still fueling our minds first thing in the morning with high-octane caffeine. That's why I'm so glad to welcome our brand partner, Savorista Coffee.
Hi, my name is Chris. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ, and I struggle with anxiety, shame, and OCD. Oh, absolutely, Jordan. Savorista hits right at the heart of the recovery lifestyle. Their founder, Kate Brown, created craft decaf and half-calf coffee out of her own story of realizing caffeine was just amplifying her stress. Her whole focus is built on less hustle and more intention. Our listeners can go to savorista.com and enter the promo code PCDC to get 25% off.
It really helps you pause and savor life instead of constantly running on high alert overdrive. And speaking of creating a calm space for mind and body, another major area where we need rest is getting actual restorative sleep. That's why we're also so grateful to welcome Cozy Earth to the cafe today.
Yes, Cozy Earth completely redefines sleep comfort with their bedding and pajamas made from premium viscose from bamboo, which naturally wicks moisture to keep hot sleepers cool and dry all night long. Thousands of five-star customer reviews call these sheets buttery soft, and they back everything with a 100-night sleep trial and a 10-year warranty. Our listeners can head over to CozyEarth.com and use that exact same promo code PCBC to get an exclusive 21% off any product.
That is an incredible deal. And because we earn a commission, when you use our code PCBC at checkout for either of these brands, you're directly supporting the show and the ministry here at the cafe.
Yeah.
But now, Chris, let's step completely out of commercial mode. When we talk about holding on to bitterness, we have to acknowledge that some grudges feel incredibly justified. Esau had every right to be furious with his family, yet he chose a completely different path.
Yeah, he really did. And understanding how he managed to actually take that path is exactly what we need to get into today.
Right. Because I want to speak directly to you, the listener, for a minute here. If you are sitting there right now and you're carrying this heavy, just burning resentment toward someone who betrayed you.
Which is so common, honestly.
Oh, totally. It's so common. If that's you, today's conversation is designed specifically for you. Our mission right now is to really look at the anatomy of a grudge and figure out the exact mechanism of forgiveness.
Because it's not simple.
No, it's not. We're going to walk through the historical account of Jacob and Esau, which is found in the book of Genesis, and we're going to lay that narrative right alongside the practical recovery framework of step 9.
Right, because we need to figure out how a person can realistically let go of justifiable anger without just pretending the abuse never happened.
Exactly. You can't just sweep it under the rug. Because if you read the story of this specific family, the dysfunction wasn't just subtle, it was severe.
It was incredibly severe. I mean,
Yeah.
to appreciate the sheer magnitude of the grace that Esau eventually shows later in his life, you really first have to understand the toxic environment he endured as a child.
Yeah.
This was not a supportive home by any stretch of the imagination. His parents, Isaac and Rebekah, suffered from a fatal flaw that just destroys families from the inside out. They openly and unapologetically played favorites.
And they didn't even try to hide it, right?
No, not at all.
If you look at the narrative in Genesis chapter 25, the division is just stated so plainly. It says Isaac favored Esau. And it seems completely rooted in Isaac's own personal preferences.
Right, because Esau was the rugged outdoorsman.
Exactly. He was the skilled hunter. And Isaac had this immense appetite for the wild game his son brought home. It honestly feels like Isaac loved the provision and the rugged masculinity that Esau represented more than he actually loved the boy himself.
Wow, yeah.
It was a very conditional kind of affection.
Which is incredibly damaging for a child's development.
Mm.
I mean, when a parent's love feels tied to a specific skill or a specific utility, like providing a certain type of food.
Yeah, performing for love.
Exactly. The child internalizes the idea that they are only as valuable as what they can produce. And then on the flip side of that entire dynamic, you have Rebekah, who entirely favored the other twin, Jacob.
Right. Jacob was the quiet homebody.
Right. He was perfectly content to stay among the tents, just close to his mother.
That creates such an impossible dynamic for a family. You have a father favoring the outdoorsman and a mother favoring the quiet one. It's this complete lack of mutual love and respect between the parents.
And that kind of division at the top trickles down, doesn't it?
Oh, it completely infects the relationship between the siblings.
Mm.
They aren't just brothers at that point. They are proxies for their parents' disjointed marriage.
That is such a brilliant way to frame it. The parents are essentially using their children to act out their own marital disconnect.
Yeah.
The brothers were practically set up to be bitter rivals from the very beginning. I mean, the account even points out that this rivalry was active at the exact moment of their birth. Jacob came into the world literally grasping Esau's heel.
Which is where he gets his name.
Yes.
The name Jacob literally carries the meaning.
Yeah.
He grasps the heel. Or, even more ominously, he deceives. Imagine having that identity stamped on you from your very first breath. The deceiver.
It's a heavy, heavy burden. And it certainly shaped how he interacted with the world. But, if we are going to examine this entire picture fairly, we also have to look at Esau's responsibility here.
Okay, yeah.
Because Esau was wronged, yes, absolutely. But he wasn't just this passive observer who got swept up in his family's dysfunction. He made some deeply rash, really damaging choices of his own.
I always struggle with this part of the story, I'll be honest. I look at Esau, and I just want to see him purely as a victim. But the narrative doesn't really let us do that, does it?
No, it doesn't.
There are these moments where he clearly sabotages his own life.
He absolutely does. And it forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question about our own resentments, right? Like, how often do our own impulsive decisions make us vulnerable to the pain we eventually suffer?
Oof, that's a hard question.
It is. Take the most famous incident in Esau's early life, the lentil stew.
Right. Let's look at that. So Esau comes in from the open country one day, and he is just completely famished. Jacob is cooking this red lentil stew. Esau demands some of it, and Jacob, living up to that identity of the heel grasper, immediately senses leverage. He tells Esau to sell him his birthright first.
And we really need to pause here and understand what a birthright was in that specific culture. It wasn't just a symbolic title.
No, it was huge.
It was the sacred inheritance.
Yeah.
It carried spiritual authority, leadership of the entire family, and a double portion of the family's material wealth. It was literally the most valuable thing Esau possessed.
And Esau, in a moment of unbelievable short-sightedness, essentially says, "Look, I am about to die of hunger. What good is a birthright to me?" He swears an oath, trades his sacred inheritance for a single bowl of stew, and earns the nickname Edom, which means red.
Just for a bowl of soup.
But let me challenge you on this, because I can hear someone listening right now thinking, well, if I am literally starving to death, I might trade something abstract for a meal too. Are we judging him too harshly here?
That is a really fair pushback. If he were truly weeks into a famine, actively dying of starvation, maybe we could view it as a tragic necessity. But the context implies something very, very different. He is coming in from a hunt. He is worn out and hungry, yes. But he is right in the encampment of his wealthy family.
He wasn't going to drop dead.
Exactly. He wasn't going to drop dead. He was just experiencing intense, immediate physical discomfort, and he allowed that temporary discomfort to completely override his long-term spiritual reality.
So it's a massive issue of immediate gratification.
Exactly. He despised his birthright by treating it as less valuable than a bowl of soup. He signaled to Jacob, and really to the whole world, that he didn't truly value the sacred position he held.
Wow.
And he compounded that grief later on, too. When Esau was 40 years old, he made another highly impulsive decision. He married 2 pagan Hittite women, Judith and Basemath.
And in the context of their family's spiritual lineage, which was supposed to remain separate from the surrounding Canaanite culture, that was a massive blow.
A huge blow.
The account in Genesis specifically notes that these marriages were a massive source of grief to Isaac and Rebekah. Rebekah even says later that she was disgusted with living because of them.
So the family fracture was already incredibly deep at this point. You have a father who loves conditionally, a mother who favors the other's son, a brother who acts like a predator just waiting for a moment of weakness, and Esau himself, who is impulsive and shows profound disrespect for his family's values.
Looking at all of that, it really makes you wonder how personal missteps and external betrayals intertwine in our own lives today. I mean, did Esau's impulsiveness excuse what his family did to him now?
Oh, absolutely not. And this is a crucial point for anyone listening who has been harmed. Your vulnerabilities, your mistakes, or your impulsive behaviors do not justify someone else's abuse or betrayal.
That's so important to hear.
It really is. Esau's tendency to prioritize immediate gratification created cracks in his foundation, yes. But that does not excuse the targeted, deliberate deception that Rebekah and Jacob orchestrated next.
And that deception, which is detailed in Genesis chapter 27, is honestly chilling when you look at the mechanics of it. Isaac is old. His eyes are so weak he can't see, and he knows his days are numbered. So he calls for Esau and asks him to go hunt wild game and prepare the tasty food he loves so he can give Esau his firstborn blessing before he dies.
It's supposed to be an intimate, sacred moment between a father and his firstborn. But Rebekah is eavesdropping.
Of course she is.
She overhears this request, and she immediately pivots into manipulation. She commands Jacob to go to the flock, fetch 2 choice young goats, and she personally prepares the meal to mimic the wild game Isaac loves.
The premeditation there is just staggering. She doesn't just suggest a lie, she orchestrates a full sensory illusion.
Yes, she does.
She takes Esau's best clothes that carry the distinct scent of the field and the outdoors, and she puts them on Jacob. Then, because Esau was a famously hairy man and Jacob had smooth skin, she literally takes the skins of the 2 young goats and covers Jacob's hands and the smooth part of his neck.
Think about the audacity of that. She's targeting a vulnerable, blind old man, and when Jacob walks into his father's tent, he commits to this lie on every conceivable level.
Well, it goes all in.
He does. He lies verbally, saying directly to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn." He lies physically by offering the goatskins to be touched. He lies relationally by weaponizing his father's trust.
And the most offensive part to me is that he drags God into the lie. Isaac is suspicious because Jacob returned so quickly. Isaac asks how he found the game so fast, and Jacob has the nerve to say, "The Lord your God gave me success."
It is the ultimate betrayal. He uses the language of faith to validate a fraud. And Isaac, still unsure, pulls him close. He says, "The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau."
Wow.
He smells the clothes, he feels the animal skins, and his senses deceive him. He proceeds to pass on the blessing.
And this blessing isn't just a nice wish for a good life. It is the definitive transfer of power and prosperity.
Sure.
Isaac gives Jacob the promise of heaven's dew, the earth's richness and abundance of grain and new wine, and literal lordship over his brothers. He hands over the entire future based on a fraud.
And the theft is final. In that culture, once the blessing was spoken, it could not be retracted. So when Esau finally returns from the field, having faithfully hunted and prepared the meal his father requested, the realization of what has happened crashes down on both of them.
Just devastating.
Esau begs his father for a blessing, but Isaac is trembling violently, realizing he has been completely deceived. The sacred words have already been given to Jacob.
Esau's reaction is profound, visceral heartbreak. The narrative says he burst out with a loud and bitter cry, and that heartbreak immediately curdles into a burning fury. He vows that as soon as the days of mourning for his father are over, he is going to murder Jacob.
We have to validate that anger. For anyone listening who has been told they need to just get over a betrayal, look at Esau. His anger wasn't an overreaction. It was a completely normal human response to a profound injustice committed by the exact people who were supposed to protect him. His brother robbed him, and his mother orchestrated it.
The environment becomes so hostile, so genuinely dangerous, that Rebekah forces Jacob to flee hundreds of miles away to her brother Laban in the land of Haran, just to keep Jacob alive. The family is entirely shattered, and Jacob just runs for his life.
And that brings us to the long, silent gap in the story. Jacob spends decades up in Haran. He works, he marries, he has children, and he accumulates a massive amount of wealth. But you have to ask yourself, what happens to a person who lives with that kind of unresolved guilt for 20 years?
That is exactly where I want to go next, because we finally arrive at Genesis chapter 32, and it is time for Jacob to return to his homeland. He is traveling back from the north. He is a wealthy man, a successful man by any earthly metric, but internally he is absolutely terrified.
Terrified is the perfect word for it. Unresolved conflict doesn't just vanish because you put time and distance between yourself and the person you harmed. It festers. The memory of what he did has been sitting in Jacob's mind for 2 decades.
The narrative tells us that as he travels, the angels of God met him, and he names the place Mahanaim, which means 2 camps.
Yeah.
You would think a divine encounter like that would bring him peace.
You would think so.
But his fear of Esau is so completely dominant that even seeing angels doesn't calm him down.
Because guilt is louder than reassurance. It always is. Jacob sends messengers ahead of him to Esau, who is now living in the land of Seir over in Edom. He instructs these messengers to be incredibly subservient. He tells them to call Esau "my lord" and to refer to himself as "your servant Jacob."
He is testing the waters. He knows he left a brother who wanted him dead, and he has no idea what 20 years has done to that rage. So he waits for the messengers to return, and the news they bring back is basically the stuff of nightmares.
They don't bring a greeting, they don't bring a message of peace, they just report a single terrifying fact. We went to your brother Esau, and now he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him.
400 men. If you are Jacob and you have spent 20 years knowing you stole this man's entire future, 400 men doesn't sound like a welcoming committee.
No, not at all.
It sounds like a heavily armed execution squad. The text says Jacob was in great fear and distress, and his immediate reaction reveals the pure panic of a guilty conscience.
What does he do? He goes straight into damage control. He divides the people who are with him, along with all the flocks and herds and camels, into two separate groups. His reasoning is entirely driven by fear. If Esau comes and attacks one group, maybe the other group can escape.
Think about the psychology of that. He is projecting his own guilt onto Esau. He assumes Esau is exactly the same man he was the day Jacob fled. He assumes the grudge has only sharpened and hardened over time.
And in his desperation, Jacob prays a very raw, revealing prayer. He reminds God of the promises made to him, but he also openly admits his complete unworthiness of all the kindness God has shown him. He begs to be saved from Esau's hand, terrified that Esau is going to slaughter the mothers with their children.
It's a moment of total vulnerability. But Jacob doesn't stop at prayer. He immediately launches this frantic, massive bribery campaign. He selects a staggering amount of livestock to send ahead of him as a gift to Esau.
The list is overwhelming. He sends 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 female camels with their young, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys, and 10 male donkeys.
Let's visualize the sheer scale of that for a second. That is 580 animals plus the young camels. It is a massive fortune on the hoof. But it's not just the amount of the wealth, it's the strategy behind how he delivers it that tells us so much about how guilt operates.
Exactly, because he doesn't send them all at once. He divides them into separate herds and tells his servants to keep space between them.
Right. He instructs the lead servant that when Esau asks who they belong to, the servant is to say, "They belong to your servant Jacob. They are a gift sent to my lord Esau, and he is coming behind us." And he tells the second servant and the third to say the exact same thing. It is wave after wave of wealth meant to crash over Esau.
Jacob's internal thought process is recorded perfectly here. He thinks, I will pacify him with these gifts I am sending on ahead. Later, when I see him, perhaps he will receive me. It illustrates how fundamentally guilt changes our behavior. When we know we have caused profound harm and we have never resolved it, we try to manage the outcome. We send bribes.
And a bribe today doesn't have to be 500 animals, right? Today, it might look like excessive flattery or over-accommodating someone's demands or trying to manage other people's perceptions of us by always being the nice guy in the room. We try to control the environment because we are absolutely terrified of facing the truth of our actions.
We overcompensate, big time.
It reminds me of a dynamic you see sometimes with wild animals. Imagine someone trying to walk through a gate guarded by a vicious, hungry animal. Instead of facing it, they start throwing massive scraps of meat over the fence, piece by piece, hoping the beast will gorge itself, become lethargic, and lose its drive to attack before they ever have to open the gate. Jacob is just throwing wave after wave of livestock over the fence, hoping to gorge Esau's anger before they come face to face.
That paints the picture perfectly. And the tragic part about throwing those scraps over the fence is that Jacob doesn't realize the situation on the other side. He is wasting his emotional wealth, his mental energy, trying to pacify a threat that might not even exist anymore. He's treating his brother like a dangerous predator because his guilt tells him that's what he deserves.
And this immense, suffocating fear culminates that very night at the ford of the Jabbok stream. Jacob sends his wives, his servants, his 11 sons, and all his possessions across the water. He strips himself of everything that makes him feel safe or powerful, and he is left completely alone in the dark.
And that is when one of the most mysterious, profound events in the entire narrative occurs. A man wrestles with Jacob there until daybreak. It's a physical, agonizing struggle in the dirt and the dark. When the man sees he cannot overpower Jacob, he touches the socket of Jacob's hip and it is wrenched out of joint.
Imagine the pain of that. But even with a dislocated hip, Jacob refuses to let go.
Yeah.
He demands a blessing. The man asks his name. Now think back 20 years. The last time a divine figure of authority, his father, asked for his identity, Jacob lied. He said, "I am Esau." But here, in the dark, stripped of all his wealth and his schemes, Jacob finally tells the truth. He says, Jacob.
He admits his true identity. I am the deceiver. I am the heel grasper. And because he finally stands in the truth of who he is, his name is changed to Israel, which means he struggles with God. Jacob calls the place Peniel, saying he saw God face to face and his life was spared.
It is this beautiful moment of being stripped down to nothing. All the bribes, all the scheming, all the wealth are on the other side of the river. Jacob is left limping, vulnerable, and completely dependent on God's mercy as the sun begins to rise.
And that sunrise brings us directly into Genesis chapter 33, where the tension that has been building for decades finally reaches its breaking point.
Jacob looks up, and there is Esau, coming with his 400 men. The moment he has dreaded for 20 years is suddenly happening right in front of him.
And notice how deeply ingrained our habits of fear really are. Even after wrestling with God and receiving a new name, Jacob's immediate human reaction is still highly defensive. He arranges his family in a very specific protective order.
Yeah, he puts the female servants and their children in the very front line, then Leah and her children next, and finally Rachel and Joseph in the rear. He is literally organizing his family by who he values most, putting his most beloved in the safest position in the back, just in case a slaughter begins.
It is heartbreaking to watch him still operating in such terror. He goes on ahead of all of them and begins bowing down to the ground, not just once, but 7 times as he approaches his brother.
Put yourself in that physical posture for a second. Bowing down to the dirt, standing up, taking a few steps, bowing down to the dirt again. It is a posture of total humiliating submission. It is a physical demonstration that he is anticipating punishment and begging for his life.
But then the turning point happens. It is one of the most breathtaking reversals you will ever read. Esau does not attack. He doesn't order his 400 men to draw their swords. The narrative says Esau ran to meet Jacob. He embraced him. He threw his arms around Jacob's neck and kissed him, and they wept.
I want to just sit with that contrast for a second. You have Jacob, crippled from the wrestling match, moving slowly, bowing down to the dirt in absolute terror, locked in this expectation of violent retribution. And then you have Esau throwing off all the protocols of a warlord, abandoning his grievance, and running with open arms.
It shatters the entire dynamic. Holding on to a grudge keeps both parties completely locked in a cycle of fear and anticipation of pain. Jacob was imprisoned by his guilt, assuming he was about to be executed. But forgiveness breaks that cycle instantly. Esau's open arms completely dismantled Jacob's defensive posture.
You can almost feel the decades of tension just evaporating in the dust right there. But I have to ask, how does that happen? How does a man who swore to murder his brother 20 years ago suddenly run and embrace him? It highlights this incredible, quiet, internal work that must have happened in Esau's heart over those 2 decades.
Somewhere along that long, difficult road of his life, Esau found the immense wisdom to let go of his past. He recovered from his hatred. He consciously set aside the drive to retaliate.
And that decision is what allowed this reunion to happen. When we hold on to bitterness, when we refuse to forgive the people who have wronged us, we build massive defensive barriers. Much like Jacob dividing his camps, we try to protect ourselves from future pain. But those barriers only end up isolating us from love and connection.
It brings to mind the very direct instruction we find in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 32. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you.
God's pardon to us is completely unconditional. And setting aside our right to assign blame, our right to demand payment for the things stolen from us, is really the only way to bring healing to our own hearts. Esau chose to heal his own heart rather than to destroy his brother.
He did. After the weeping, Esau looks up and sees the women and children. He asks who they are, and Jacob introduces them, saying, "They are the children God has graciously given your servant." And they all come forward and bow down. It is a peaceful meeting, a complete restoration of what was broken so long ago.
Now, this is an incredibly beautiful picture of reunion. It warms the heart. But I need to stop us right here, because this brings up a crucial, absolutely life-saving distinction that we have to make. When we talk about forgiveness, especially in the context of deep betrayal or abuse, there's a very dangerous misconception that often gets tied to stories like this.
Yes. The world, and sometimes even well-meaning people in the church, falsely equate forgiveness with reconciliation. They assume that if you truly forgive someone, you must force a reunion, much like the tearful embrace Esau and Jacob just had.
And for many people listening right now, especially those who are victims of abuse, that expectation is not just unhealthy, it is physically and emotionally dangerous. The idea that forgiveness requires you to hug the person who harmed you is a lie that keeps people trapped in cycles of trauma.
Exactly. And because of this very real danger, Celebrate Recovery has intentionally rewritten Step 9 specifically to protect those who have suffered from physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. It is a vital distinction, and the step reads exactly like this. Extend forgiveness to ourselves and to others who have perpetrated against us, realizing this is an attitude of the heart, not always confrontation.
I want to repeat that last part for anyone who needs to hear it today. Realizing this is an attitude of the heart, not always confrontation.
Let's explore what that actually means. Forgiveness is a transaction that happens internally between you and God. The entire goal is to release the poison of bitterness from your own soul so that it stops destroying your peace. It absolutely does not mean you must arrange a face-to-face meeting with your abuser. It does not mean you allow them back into your life. And it certainly does not mean you subject yourself to further harm just to prove you are a forgiving person. You can completely, fully forgive someone in your heart from a safe, permanent distance.
That is such a vital boundary. So let me ask you this. If the goal isn't necessarily a tearful hug and a reunion like Esau and Jacob had, how does a person actually know when they've successfully forgiven someone in their heart? If there's no visible reunion to prove it, what does it feel like internally?
It is a profound shift in your internal landscape. You know you have forgiven someone when your mind is no longer consumed by the debt they owe you. The desire for them to suffer the exact way they made you suffer begins to fade.
So it's not about forgetting what happened.
Not at all. It doesn't mean the memory is gone or that what they did is suddenly okay or justified. It simply means you have chosen to stop drinking the poison of resentment. You stop wishing for their destruction. The internal peace of releasing that debt back to God becomes more valuable to you than the temporary satisfaction of retaliation.
That is incredibly freeing. It means your healing isn't dependent on the other person's apology. It doesn't rely on their changed behavior or their willingness to make amends. The healing is entirely between you and God. And when we process forgiveness correctly like that, it actually shifts our entire vision, which brings us to the most practical result of letting go. We see this vividly as the conversation between Esau and Jacob continues.
Yes, let's look at what happens next in Genesis chapter 33. After meeting the family, Esau asks about those massive herds he encountered on the road, the waves of goats and camels and cows. He says, "What's the meaning of all these flocks and herds I met?" Jacob answers honestly. He says they were to find favor in his eyes.
Jacob is still trying to pay off the debt. He is still operating in that transactional mindset of guilt. He thinks he still has to buy his brother's mercy. But Esau's response in Genesis 33, verse 9, is one of the most profound statements in the entire narrative. Esau simply looks at him and says, "I already have plenty, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself."
I already have plenty. Think about the power of that statement. That is the ultimate proof that forgiveness had finished its work in Esau's heart long before Jacob ever showed up. He was finally able to take his eyes off Jacob, stop obsessing over the blessing that was stolen from him decades ago, look around at the life God had built for him in Seir, and recognize his own abundance.
He wasn't keeping score anymore. When you and I are trapped in bitterness, we constantly view our lives through the lens of what was taken from us. We look at our bank accounts, our relationships, our careers, our families, and a voice in our head whispers, "This would be so much better if that person hadn't ruined it."
We let the person who harmed us become the author of our present dissatisfaction.
Exactly. But Esau shifted his vision. He focused on what he currently possessed, not what was stolen. He looked at his 400 men, his own families, his own herds, and he realized he was blessed. Gratitude is the ultimate antidote to bitterness.
And even though Esau refuses the massive bribe initially, Jacob insists. Jacob begs Esau to accept the gift. He says that seeing Esau's face is like seeing the face of God, now that he has been received favorably. Jacob is still projecting his guilt. He needs Esau to take the gift to solidify the peace in his own anxious mind. Jacob says, "Please accept the present that was brought to you, for God has been gracious to me, and I have all I need."
And because Jacob insists so strongly, Esau eventually accepts it. But let's be clear about why he takes it.
Notice the quiet dignity in Esau accepting that gift. He doesn't take it as a repayment for the stolen blessing. He doesn't take it greedily, thinking, "It's about time you paid me back." He accepts it as an act of restored relationship. It is a concession to ease his brother's conscience. He didn't need the money. He didn't need the livestock. He'd already found his peace.
That quiet dignity really sets the tone for their departure. The tension is gone. Esau, acting again as a protective older brother, offers to travel together, or at least to leave some of his 400 men behind to protect Jacob's camp as they journey.
But Jacob declines. He explains that the children are tender, and the ewes and cows are nursing their young. If they are driven hard for even one day, all the animals will die. Jacob knows his own pace. He needs to travel slowly.
And Esau respects that boundary. They don't force a permanent cohabitation just because they reconciled. They part in total peace. Esau heads back to Seir. Jacob journeys to Succoth, which literally means shelters, where he builds a place for himself and his livestock. And eventually, he arrives safely at the city of Shechem in Canaan.
And when Jacob arrives in Shechem, he buys a plot of ground for 100 pieces of silver from the sons of Hamor. He sets up his tent, and he builds an altar, calling it El Elo Israel. It is a declaration of faith, a settling into the land, and a peaceful resolution to a journey that started in absolute terror.
It is a beautiful picture of what happens when bitterness is finally laid down and grace takes over. In our own lives, we need to take a direct cue from Esau. If we want to experience the peace he found, we must lay aside the heavy burden of bitterness. We have to stop keeping a meticulous score of our past betrayals. Only when we stop looking backward at what was taken can we take a clear, unobstructed look at our own blessings today.
But practicing that level of radical, boundary-safe forgiveness isn't something most of us can just decide to do on our own in isolation. It takes time, and it requires the ongoing support of a healthy family, a community that understands the reality of pain and the absolute necessity of grace.
And that's exactly what the weekly fellowship of Celebrate Recovery at Peters Creek Baptist Church in South Park, Pennsylvania is designed to be. It is a place where you can learn to process these deep wounds safely.
It truly is. If you need a secure, trauma-informed environment where you can safely process your pain without being judged, that community is there for you. The Friday night schedule is structured specifically to provide safety and healing. The evening begins precisely at 6:30 p.m. with large group worship. This is a time for corporate praise, solid biblical teaching, and real-life testimonies that constantly remind us of the power of grace.
Then at 7:30 p.m., the evening transitions into gender-specific small groups. These groups are governed by incredibly strict guidelines to protect everyone involved, especially those who have been marginalized or abused. There is zero crosstalk allowed, absolutely no unsolicited advice giving, and a fierce commitment to absolute confidentiality. It is a space where you can speak your truth without fear of someone trying to fix you.
And finally, at 8:30 p.m., the Crosstalk Cafe opens. This is a relaxed space designed to help you build healthy, safe relationships. It's the perfect time to connect with sponsors who deeply understand the difficult, ongoing work of letting go of resentments and trusting God with the process.
If you are listening today and you live in the local South Park or Bethel Park area, we warmly invite you to join us this coming Friday night. But if you are tuning in from outside Western Pennsylvania, you do not have to walk this road alone either. You can find a safe, Bible-centered recovery fellowship near you by simply visiting crlocator.com and entering your zip code.
You can also reach out directly to the leadership team if you have questions or need guidance on how to start this journey. You can email Craig Amstone at craig.amstone@gmail.com, or you can contact the church office directly at info@pcbc.church.
Stop letting the pain of your past hold your present joy hostage. Embrace the attitude of forgiveness internally, count the blessings God has provided you today, and step into freedom.
Letting go truly changes everything.
It really does. And as we finish our time together today, I want to leave you with one final thought to carry with you throughout the week. What if the greatest thing Esau gained wasn't the wealth he accumulated in Seir, but the profound realization that his identity and his future were never actually controlled by his brother's actions in the first place? When you look at your own life, whose actions are you still allowing to write the story of your future?